What's going on, guys? I'm Flint Masters, and welcome to part 2 of the story of David Genat, aka the Golden God of Australian Survivor. For those of you who have not seen part 1, I highly recommend you watch that first, as not only does it cover David's original run in Champions vs. Contenders, but considering All-Stars came months after Champions vs. Contenders, and the season started filming pretty much right after David was eliminated, his 2-season run is basically one big story, as David came into All-Stars with a massive target on his back, with only the winners having a bigger target. But despite this being a cast of all-stars who literally just finished seeing David play, very well aware of his capabilities, David would not only go on to make it farther than anyone could have possibly imagined, but he would go on to play one of the most dominant games in Survivor history. So today, let's go through the amazing gameplay of David Genat in Australian Survivor All-Stars, and the game that solidified himself as the Golden God of Australian Survivor. Once again, guys, I can only use a certain amount of clips due to copyright, so please keep that in mind throughout the video. But with that said, I hope you enjoy the second part of David's 2-part story.
David, you've only just finished playing last season. Why do you want to play again?
Revenge.
Revenge? Specifically?
You'll have to wait and see.
David entered All-Stars very aware of his perception as a big-time player, as he was even paired with the other big-time players of seasons past to promote this season. But one thing David also knew very well was that there was a reason why he had made it big in life as a supermodel, as he had the looks and charm of a champion, and he used these great traits to bond with most of the Vakama tribe. Sure, maybe it was because it was early and nobody wanted to throw out David's name yet, especially considering he was such a big challenge asset, but nonetheless, so far, so good for David. Episode 2 now, and two very clear sides are forming on Vakama. You have the older group consisting of Jericho, Moana, Tarzan, Jackie, and its leader Matt on one side, and then you have the younger and more attractive people on the other side, which obviously included David. And after Vakama lost her first immunity challenge, the target for the majority was originally Moana for being the weakest. However, David made his first big move of the season when he suggested a new target.
I reckon Jerry. I don't really trust Jerry. He's very likable, and that makes him a huge threat in this game. So I want to take him out.
And at Tribal, the majority goes along with David's wishes and votes out Jericho in a 7-5 vote. Now yes, Jericho was an obvious threat and was probably going to be taken out next after Moana, but still, the fact that David got his entire alliance to switch from Moana to Jericho showed just how much power and influence he had in his alliance. In fact, his power was so dominant that he felt he could work with the tribe's other dominant figure in Matt, which would culminate in one of the greatest episodes in all of Survivor. Knowing that Matt basically had no other choice, David approached him with a genius plan, and quite frankly, a plan with so much potential that I'm surprised it took 20 years for it to finally happen. Here was David's plan. He and Matt would act like they were against each other, especially since they were the figureheads in their respective alliance. But while it would appear they were against each other, in reality, they would work with each other behind the scenes, taking jabs at each other's alliance to take out players that would be beneficial for both their games in the long run. And after Matt promised Dave he could idle out anyone from David's side, David put his plan into action to get revenge on Daisy. For those of you who don't remember, Daisy flipped on David in their season, and she was the one who was supposed to go home on the night he was blindsided. So after Vakama lost the immunity challenge, David and Matt hatched their plan. David would tell Matt who the majority was voting for, so he could then play the idol for that person and idle Daisy out of the game. But David would still vote with his alliance in order to hide his allegiance to Matt. The majority sided on Jackie as the safe vote, to which David told Matt, and it seemed like the plan was set. However, there was one problem. Brooke, who was in the majority alliance, found an idol before Tribal, and David knew if she played it on Daisy, that would ruin his plan. So, he told Matt to throw his name under the bus in order to get Brooke to play her idol on David, knowing she would most likely play her idol after Matt played his idol for Jackie. This would not only get 2 idols out of the game, but it would even further hide Matt and David's alliance, since Matt was throwing David's name out there as a target. And at Tribal, the plan goes absolutely perfect, as Matt plays his idol for Jackie, Brooke plays her idol for David, and the minority 4 use their votes to blindside Daisy.
Well, as much as my kids loved the last one I took home, I might play it for Jackie.
You're gonna play this for Jackie?
Yeah.
Jonathan, sorry, while we're on the topic, I will play it for David.
For David. Daisy. 2 votes Moana, 1 vote Daisy. Third person voted out of Australian Survivor All-Stars, Daisy.
So David formed a secret alliance with arguably the biggest power player in the game, got 2 idols out of the game, including one being played on him, was able to keep his alliance a secret the entire time, despite the insanity, and best of all, he got his revenge on Daisy. Simply unreal. It's episode 4 now, and the fallout from the Unreal Tribal Council. Unfortunately for David, it feels a little too unreal to some of the players, and they do in fact feel that there is a mole in the majority alliance. But again, nobody expects it to be David. After the reward challenge, as the survivor gods would have it, Matt finds the idol in front of the entire tribe. This once again basically forces Matt to rely on David to protect him, and hopefully use his known idol to make another big play. However, David was a little wary that Matt might become a little too powerful, and wanting to be the powerful one, and in general wanting a weapon for the future, David made a fake idol for the 2nd straight season.
I need to make sure that I have options out here. So the second I get a chance, I steal away in the night, grab that tackle box, and I go to work on it with the machete. Why isn't it coming off? Oh, yes. I really think this looks pretty good right now. It's not super solid, but if I was sitting in a tribal council and somebody put this around the neck, I would buy it.
Episodes 5 and 6 are rather quiet for David, especially for his standards. I mean, we still get the classic David confessionals, but due to Bakuma winning the next 2 immunity challenges, and the 2 sides on Bakuma still being set in stone, we never get to see another tribal council involving David and Matt. But one interesting thing to note here, apparently, even though it wasn't shown on TV, the majority alliance figured out that David was the mole in their alliance, and had Bakuma gone to another tribal, more than likely, he would have been the one blindsided. Now, how much of this is true, I'm not sure, and considering what we saw from David the rest of the season, it wouldn't surprise me if players like Flick and Brooke were saying this to prop up their own games to the fans. But whether another epic tribal would have happened, or David in fact would have been a pre-jury boot this season, old Bakuma dynamics no longer mattered, as in episode 7, the 2 tribes swapped into 2 new tribes. David was now a member of Makuta, and luckily for him, the old Bakuma had the 5-4 majority over the old Makuta. The problem, however, was that only one of the other old Bakuma was in David's original alliance, in Phoebe. Tarzan, Jackie, and Moana were all in Matt's alliance. And worst of all, David no longer had Matt to play double agent with. So not wanting to play it safe, David started to form bonds with the old Makuta, the main one being Zack, another alpha male in the game who had just been voted out by the original Makuta. We also saw Pandora's box be introduced this episode, as there were 2 keys in the jungle to open the box, but only the first person to open it would earn an advantage. And unfortunately, Nick is the one to open the box, with his advantage being an extra vote. And worst of all, Nick shares this with Phoebe, in hopes of pulling Phoebe into his alliance. This would obviously be a disaster for Dave, being that Phoebe was far and away his closest ally on the tribe. However, despite all the questions looming, we don't really see where the new tribe stands, as Makuta 2.0 wins the first immunity challenge as new tribes. Episode 8 starts off with David feeling uneasy, as he desperately wants to find out who got the advantage from Pandora's box. At the immunity challenge, Jonathan reveals that both tribes will be going to tribal council to vote somebody out. So tonight would be the night for David to find out where he stood in the new Makuta tribe. Feeling that Nick was the biggest threat in the entire tribe, David even approached the original Makuta with the plan to blindside him. He also knew that in order to keep Matt happy on the other side, he had to protect his closest ally in Moana, and the 2 made a secret deal, similar to David's secret deal with Matt originally. But with Moana knowing that having David around as an ally would be great for her game, she wanted to weaken his game as much as possible to ensure he would stick by her side, and got the majority of the tribe to blindside his closest ally in Phoebe. To make matters worse for Dave, Phoebe, not wanting to go along with David's plan to blindside Nick after the 2 had built such a good bond, told Nick of David's plan to blindside him, and that the tribe had to vote for Moana to not only save himself, but to also take out the new leader of the older person alliance. At tribal council, in a 4-3-2 vote, Moana's plan is ultimately the one that comes out on top, as Phoebe is voted out of the tribe. However, in a twist, Phoebe gets a second chance, going up against Lydia in a fire-making challenge, as Lydia had been voted out of Bakuma. And in a blowout, Phoebe beats Lydia in the fire-making challenge, winning her way back into the game. So, not the greatest of tribals for Dave. His plan to get Nick out didn't work, and his 2 closest allies of Mo and Phoebe went away from his plan to intentionally make him weaker, as again, everyone in the game knew how threatening David was. But trust me when I say, this is literally the lowest point of David's entire game. Going into episode 9, David felt for the first time the entire game that he had no control and was incredibly angry at Phoebe for not going with his plan to blindside Nick. This is exactly what Mo wanted and tried to convince David that it would be best for both their games to blindside Phoebe. However, not fully trusting Mo, or for that matter, anyone on Makuta, David went on an idol hunt. And take a wild guess if he found it or not.
This is gonna turn my whole game around. The Golden God has risen again. Powers already getting going to my head.
Makuta goes on to win immunity, and David comes out of this episode feeling much better than he did coming in. And to start off episode 10, we in fact hear from David about his thoughts on his place in the Makuta tribe. He still doesn't trust Phoebe whatsoever, he's really close with Zach, and he's trusting Moana more and more by the day. But other than that, the episode is pretty quiet for Dave, as Makuta once again wins immunity. Episode 11 is really a massive turning point in David's game. Knowing she was at the bottom, Phoebe was in desperate need of an idol, and luckily had a clue for an idol. But after not being able to find it, she shared her clue with none other than the Golden God himself. Oh, Phoebe. So wanting that idol for himself, David tricked Phoebe, intentionally leading her away from camp while he looked around the termite mound where Phoebe said the idol was.
Actually cannot believe that Phoebe is telling me about this clue.
Do you want to let me in? I'll tell you.
Yeah, it's in a termite mound.
Thank you, baby. Oh.
Got it, baby.
First time in the history of Australian Survivor, someone is sitting on 2 idols. This is like straight up Iron Man's lasers right here. People gonna be trying to blindside me, and I'm gonna be like, drown, drown, drown.
Yep, David now had 2 idols in his pocket, all thanks to Phoebe, who was his target. And at the immunity challenge, Makuta loses their first challenge as a new tribe, sending them to tribal. Mo and David both put their plan into action to blindside Phoebe, getting the old Bakama plus Zach on board. David also approached Sharn with a final 3 deal with Mo, which turns out to be an important moment this season, despite it being so random at the time. In the end, Zach and Sharn found themselves to be the swing votes, and while Zach sided with David, Sharn didn't, and thanks to Nick using his extra vote, the vote resulted in a tie, as the other side targeted Moana. But on the revote, Sharn flipped to David's side, and Phoebe was voted out, with David taunting her the entire time, wearing Phoebe's potential idol around his neck.
I plan on following through with exactly what I said I was going to do today.
You voted Phoebe. Hey, Phoebe.
That's 4 votes, that's enough.
Dude, come on.
Bluffing you with your own idol.
Episode 12 starts off with David relieved to finally get rid of Phoebe, although he and Mo are upset at Sharn for originally writing Mo's name down at Tribal. But Sharn claims this was only to hide her alliance with them, and does in fact believe they could be a powerful trio moving forward. And after seeing Nick go out of his way to try and save Phoebe, this furthers David's thought of Nick being a super dangerous player, and he becomes David's new target. However, Makuta wins immunity, and David's plan is put on hold for now. But the following episode, Nick doesn't get so lucky, as Makuta loses and heads back to Tribal. However, there is one thing that could save Nick and stop David's plan to blindside him. On Bakama, Harry had an advantage in the game that would allow Tribal Council to be stopped on the spot, meaning that the votes wouldn't be read and all players would head right back to camp. After Harry got intel from Nick that he was on the bottom, he seriously debated on handing his advantage over to Nick to save him, as the two were old allies on the original Makuta. However, not 100% sure knowing this was the case, combined with the fact that Harry knew he would be next to go on Bakama, he decided to keep the advantage for himself. This was a season-changing mistake for Harry, as with Lee and Sharn knowing there was no way they could save Nick, the entire tribe unified together, going into a potential merge, voting Nick out unanimously. So with that, David had gotten Phoebe and Nick out of the game, 2 people he did not trust in the slightest, all the while making connections with virtually everyone on the new Makuta, and single-handedly bringing them together as one, entering the merge. Simply amazing gameplay. Episode 14 now, and the 2 tribes merge as one, and the lines are clearly drawn. You have the Bakuma 5 on one side and the Makuta 7 on the other, but Zach and David are obviously the swing votes. But to be honest, David doesn't really think twice about his decision, as he knows with all the options he has on Makuta, it's without question in his best interest to stay with them. And surprisingly, the show makes this very clear from the beginning, and doesn't try to hide David's decision. In fact, this entire episode is basically dedicated to David, as he plays both sides, and manipulates the Bakuma 5 into thinking he's with them. But at Tribal, David and the Makuta 7 blindside Locky in a 7-5 vote.
Lucky, the tribe has spoken. It has.
So going into episode 15, the lines are even more clear, as the Makuta 7 have the majority alliance, leaving the rest of the Bakumas in serious trouble. David personally wants to target Harry, as he was the last person left in the game that was in on his blindside last season, and he wants to overtake Harry's record of most amount of days played consecutively on Survivor. Yes, David is that petty. And ironically, the immunity challenge is the final immunity challenge from last season, which Harry lost and made him the fallen angel of that season. Unfortunately for Harry, he couldn't rewrite history, as he lasted for only 90 minutes this season, despite going at it for over 7 hours last season, and was ultimately voted out in a 5-4-2 vote.
Harry, the tribe has spoken. Happy to go.
It's episode 16, and David has complete control over the game. He's in the majority alliance, has 2 idols in his pocket, and has many final 2 and 3 deals with basically everyone on Makuta. However, David, and for that matter, everyone's game is put on pause when they are informed that Lee chose to withdraw from the game due to his mother being in critical condition. Not only did it suck to see Lee go out like this, but David lost a member of the majority and a potential massive shield in terms of challenge threats down the road. Despite the somber mood, the tribe still competed in an immunity challenge, and after going against Shawnee for over 2 hours, he couldn't outlast her, giving Shawnee immunity, but putting her allies AK and Brooke at risk. And going into Tribal, the now Makuta 6 were still tight. In fact, they were so tight that AK and Brooke both knew that they needed Shawnee's vote, since they knew the votes were being split on them. But due to Lee's untimely departure and Australian Survivor needing to stretch the season out to fit their 24 episode schedule, before everyone casted their votes, Jonathan revealed what was going to happen. The castaways with the 3 highest amount of votes at the next 2 tribal councils would be sent to Exile Beach to compete in 2 challenges, with 3 players earning their safety, and the 3 players who didn't earn their safety would be the only 3 eligible people to receive votes at the next official tribal council. Yeah, Australian Survivor can be crazy at times. So with all that in mind, the Makuta 6 stuck to the split vote, but the Bakuma 3 changed their plans given the circumstances, and voted for Moana to come with them to Exile Beach, feeling she was a weak physical player. And while it was certainly a good read by David to not play his idol here, despite the Bakuma 3 being able to take a shot at him, his unreal gameplay reached a peak the following episode. After Sharn won immunity, Shawnee, the last Bakuma left, was a lock to go to Exile, and with Tarzan being physically the weakest, there was no point in sending him to Exile to compete against Bakuma in the challenges, so he was safe. With that in mind, the group had to decide which 2 of the David, Zach, and Jackie trio would join Shawnee and the others at Exile. I mean, this should be an easy one, right? Put David, a big physical beast, on Exile, or at the very least, this would be a great time for players like Sharn and Shawnee to try and force him to use an idol. But with David knowing he would be a likely target, the Golden God went to work. First, he acted sick all day, playing up that it would be a bad idea to send him to Exile due to his quote sickness making him weak. He then convinced Zach that going to Exile would be best for him, as this would show how much he's grown since he first played, and Makuta needed a challenge piece to go up against the Bakumas at Exile Beach. And knowing Jackie and Shawnee were voting for each other, he told Tarzan and Sharn to put a vote on each one, and then take out Zach on the revote. And Tribal Council goes exactly as David planned it, as Shawnee and Jackie both received 2 votes on the first vote, sending them to Exile, with Tarzan and Sharn voting for Zach over David on the revote, as they both casted a vote for each other originally. So despite 6 of the 9 players these past 2 episodes getting majority votes, David not only wasn't one of those 6 players, despite his threatening nature, he did it without winning immunity or playing either one of his idols. Without question, some of the best gameplay in Survivor history. But despite David unbelievably making it past 2 straight tribals, it once again seemed too unbelievable to the other players, and some of David's allies were starting to realize how dangerous he truly was. At the 2 duels, Moana and Brooke won their way back in the first duel, while Jackie won the second, leaving AK, Shawnee, and Zach as the only people eligible to receive votes. After seeing David manipulate Zach so easily, and in general not liking Zach, Jackie decided to flip on Zach and told Moana this, and this was especially great for Moana and Sharn, as they also knew taking out Zach would be detrimental for David's game. So at Tribal, Moana and Sharn hide the fact that they're in on the plan, and vote with David and the Makuta men to split the votes on AK and Shawnee. However, Jackie switches her vote from AK to Zach, siding with the Bakamas and sending home David's ally and shield in a 4-3-2 vote. For the first time since the pre-merge, David's ideal result doesn't happen. In fact, he wasn't even aware that he had been played by Moana and Sharn as well, as David was now gunning for Jackie and vice versa. However, any plan to get rid of David was nullified as he won his first immunity of the season.
David down to one piece. Is it right? Yes! David wins individual immunity.
So going into Tribal, it was 4-4 down the middle, as Jackie had officially flipped to Bakama's side, especially after David brought Sharn, Tarzan, and Moana on the reward challenge over her. The Makutas voted for Jackie, and David attempted to idle her out, playing his idol on Tarzan. And even though he guessed wrong, with himself and Tarzan now being safe, and Moana being the one to draw the votes, this led Sharn as the only person in the Makuta alliance to go to rocks, obviously meaning the odds were really in their favor. But despite the good odds, Sharn didn't dare want to risk a rock draw, and convinced AK, Shawnee, and Brooke that she would side with them at the next tribal if they agreed not to go to rocks. Despite some disputing from AK, the three ultimately decided to put their faith in Sharn's hands, and Jackie was sent home.
Jackie, the tribe has spoken.
This proved to be the wrong move for Bakama, as Sharn stuck with David and the Makuta alliance, in large part due to David's incredible social gameplay, and Shawnee and AK were the next to go, leaving Brooke as the last person from her alliance left standing. However, at the final 5, Brooke won the immunity challenge, forcing the Makuta alliance to turn on each other. Since Brooke was such a challenge beast, Moana and Sharn believed it would be best to get rid of Tarzan for being the weakest physically of the 4. However, days prior, Tarzan told David that not only would he take him to the final 2, but he would literally campaign to the jury that David should win over him. So with an automatic lock in trouble, David seriously debated playing his idol for Tarzan, but this would obviously be incredibly risky, especially since he knew Brooke was throwing his name out there as a target. In the end, David just simply couldn't risk it, as he played his idol the final night he could do so, and even voted with Sharn and Moana to eliminate the weakest link in Tarzan.
20th person voted out of Australian Survivor All-Stars and 7th member of our jury. Tarzan, the tribe has spoken.
Jeez.
So the stage was set for David going into the Final 4 immunity challenge. If either himself, Moana, or Sharn won, Brooke would be the boot. If Brooke won, he knew his game would most likely be over, and basically an entire year of his life dedicated to Survivor would all go for naught. And during the challenge, Mo and Sharn fell out of it completely, leaving it all up to David to save himself and defeat Brooke, and it all came down to the final obstacle of the challenge.
He is right there. Can he land that ball? And he does! David wins individual immunity!
Literally a moment so important that it brought Dave to tears. Despite a campaign from Brooke, her fate was all but sealed, and she became the 8th member of the jury.
Brooke, the tribe has spoken.
It's the finale now, and unbelievably, David is a part of it, and is basically one immunity challenge away from winning the game. Now, this wasn't a must-win immunity for David like the last one was, as Sharn confirmed after the season that she was planning on taking Dave with her to the end. And with Moana never really standing a chance in the final immunity challenge, you could basically say David actually already had the game locked up going into the final 3. But still, why not pad their resume to one of the most dominant games of all time? At a classic brutal final immunity challenge for Australian Survivor, David outlasted Moana and Sharn for over 2 hours, winning his 3rd immunity of the season.
Out of nowhere, Sharn slips, and David wins final immunity. David, come on over. Final immunity is yours.
Again, it really didn't matter who Dave brought with him to the end, but he elected to bring Sharn, mainly since she showed such a weak side of her in front of the entire jury during the rock draw debacle, so he casted his sole vote on Moana. At the final tribal council, there really wasn't much to debate, as David played an absolute dominant game, while pretty much everyone on the jury hated Sharn for her scared gameplay, and in the end, David became the sole survivor of Australian Survivor All-Stars, beating Sharn in an 8-1 vote.
Winner of Australian Survivor All-Stars, David.
I mean, what else can you say about David? The dude came into Survivor not only with a massive target on his back, but he was arguably the most prominent figure going into All-Stars due to basically his entire Champions vs. Contenders run being shown right before the players flew out to Fiji. Everyone gives props to Russell for making it to the end in Heroes vs. Villains playing back-to-back seasons, but remember, nobody on the cast knew who he was. Everyone knew who David was after he was shoved down our throats during the summer of 2019. Yet, despite being such a massive target and Australian Survivor being such a long game, he not only won a season that was filled with all-stars, but he did so in absolute dominant fashion. From working secretly with Matt to blindside Daisy in an epic tribal council, going from the bottom to the top in Makuta, taking out people he didn't trust in Nick and Phoebe, all the while uniting the Makuta alliance heading into the merge. He had multiple solid alliances with the likes of Moana and Zack, with even Sharn and Tarzan planning on bringing him to the end. He wasn't any of the 6 boots during the Exile Beach portion of the game. He was a mastermind behind many of the blindsides this season, found 2 idols, made yet another fake idol, won 3 immunities, and won this season almost unanimously. Combine this with this already impressive resume he built in Season 4, and I think we can all agree, David is without question the best Australian Survivor player ever. And not only is he the greatest player ever, but he might just be the most entertaining as well. I mean, I've said it before, but there's a reason why Survivor doesn't produce many over-the-top winners. His gameplay was some of the most aggressive gameplay we've ever seen. He pulled off some of the greatest and rarest moves in Survivor history, and he was able to do all of this while being a top-tier character and playing a top 5 game in Survivor history. David Genat is simply the golden god of Australian Survivor. Thank you guys so much for watching both parts of David Genat's story of becoming the golden god. If you guys could please leave a like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it, as a lot of hard work was put into making these 2 parts. Plus, we need to get more Australian Survivor in the YouTube algorithm. Also, leave a comment down below if you would like me to do more story videos. And since we're talking about Australian Survivor, be sure to check out Australian Survivor Blood vs. Water, which premieres January 31st. Remember, you can watch it on Paramount+, but I'll also leave a link in the description to the Facebook group that will post the episodes of this season as well. With all that said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.